This is the story of the man behind the legend. He was a man whose intensity could inspire or alienate. His victories, his scandals, and the unshakable belief that he was destined for war. And to understand Patton's rise, you have to start where it all began, sometimes in the same moment. In the end, George S. Patton Jr. left behind a legacy as complex as the man himself. He was reckless, abrasive, and dangerously outspoken. Yet even his harshest detractors admitted one thing: Patton got results. He revolutionized modern warfare, proving the power of aggressive, mobile, combined arms tactics at a time when many still clung to slower, more cautious strategies. His emphasis on discipline, training, and relentless offense reshaped the way armies fought. How does one man become both one of history's most celebrated and most controversial generals? George S. Patton Jr. was a paradox wrapped in polished steel, a military genius whose bold tactics delivered stunning victories, yet whose explosive temper and unapologetic opinions often landed him in hot water. Soldiers called him Old Blood and Guts, and he wore that name like a badge of honor. To his troops, he was the general who would fight alongside them in the mud, push them harder than they thought possible, and refuse to accept defeat. To his critics, he was reckless, arrogant, and dangerously unpredictable. But whether you loved him or loathed him, one thing was certain: Patton lived for battle. And when that battle ended, so did the only purpose he had ever known. His death, just months after the close of World War II, remains the subject of whispers and conspiracy theories to this day. This is the story of the man behind the legend, his victories, his scandals, and the unshakable belief that he was destined for war. And to understand Patton's rise, you have to start where it all began. And to understand Patton's rise, you have to start where it all began, in a childhood built for the battlefield. George Smith Patton Jr. entered the world on November 11, 1885, in sunny San Gabriel, California. But his path was already set long before he could walk. He was born into wealth, privilege, and an unshakable military legacy. The Patton family could trace its lineage to soldiers who had fought in both the American Revolution and the Civil War. Stories of battlefield heroics weren't just bedtime tales in the Patton household. They were a blueprint for how young George was expected to live. One of his earliest influences was a family friend, the legendary Confederate cavalry officer John S. Mosby, known as the Gray Ghost. Mosby's daring raids and fearless attitude fascinated Patton, planting in him a deep respect for audacity and aggression, traits that would later define his own command style. But behind the military polish and family expectations, young Patton carried a hidden struggle. He wrestled with reading and spelling, difficulties that modern historians believe were likely undiagnosed dyslexia. Rather than slow him down, it seemed to ignite a fire in him. He devoured military history not through ease of learning, but through sheer willpower, memorizing the tactics of Hannibal, Napoleon, and countless other commanders. Patton's ambition wasn't confined to books. He was a natural athlete, a skilled horseman, swordsman, and marksman. His talent for precision and discipline earned him a place in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, competing in the grueling modern pentathlon. He finished 5th overall, but one event became the stuff of legend. In the pistol shooting competition, he insisted that one of his shots had passed clean through a bullet hole he'd already made, robbing him of a higher score. It was the first public glimpse of his fierce confidence and refusal to admit defeat. By the time he left West Point, after repeating his first year due to academic struggles, Patton had already left his mark. He revolutionized U.S. cavalry saber combat, designing the now famous Patton saber and earning the rare title of Master of the Sword. But the world outside the parade grounds was changing, and Patton's theories of speed and aggression would soon be tested on a real battlefield. And his first test would come far from Europe, in the deserts of Mexico. In 1916, George S. Patton got his first taste of real combat. and he didn't ease into it. Serving as aide to General John J. Pershing during the punitive expedition against Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa, Patton led what became the U.S. Army's very first motorized attack. Riding in Dodge touring cars with a small detachment of soldiers, he tracked down and killed Julio Cardenas, one of Villa's top lieutenants, in a blistering gunfight. Patton personally fired the shots that ended Cardenas's life, then posed for photographs with the body, a bold move that grabbed headlines and hinted at the showman he would become. That encounter made Patton a known name in military circles, but it was World War I that would define his early career. When the United States joined the fight in 1917, Patton was chosen as the very first officer assigned to the brand new American Expeditionary Force Tank Corps. At a time when tanks were still experimental and often unreliable, Patton embraced the technology with enthusiasm, seeing them as the future of warfare. In France, he built and commanded the American Tank School, training crews in tactics that prioritized speed, aggression, and coordination with infantry. His approach wasn't from behind a desk. Patton led from the front. At the Meuse-Argonne offensive, he commanded his tank brigade in person, pushing forward under heavy fire until he was severely wounded in the leg. Even as he was being carried off the field, Patton continued directing his troops, refusing to quit until the battle was won. His bravery earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, and later the Purple Heart. But more than medals, World War I gave him something he valued even more: proof that his aggressive style worked. Still, with the war's end came something Patton despised: peace. And in the quiet years between conflicts, his relentless energy and outspoken opinions would both advance his career and nearly derail it. The end of World War I left Patton restless. The world saw peace, but for him, it was the horrors of peace. A time when ambition had no battlefield to conquer. He poured his energy into a cause most of the military dismissed: the creation of a permanent, fully developed armored force. Tanks had proven themselves in the last war, but in the peacetime army, they were seen as expensive novelties. Patton fought hard to change that. During this time, he forged a friendship with another rising officer, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Together, they experimented with tactics and doctrine for using tanks in large-scale, fast-moving operations. The partnership would prove invaluable when the world went to war again, but in the 1920s and 30s, it also made them targets for criticism from traditionalists who saw them as troublemakers. One of the most controversial moments of Patton's peacetime career came in 1932, during the Bonus Army protests in Washington, D.C. Thousands of World War I veterans marched on the Capitol, demanding early payment of promised bonuses. The government's response was to send in the army to disperse them, and Patton, then a major, was given the unenviable task of leading cavalry troops against men he considered brothers in arms. He found it most distasteful, but followed orders, an action that left a stain on his public image. Patton's personality during these years was summed up by his peers in a single phrase: invaluable in war, but a disturbing element in peace. He was brilliant, driven, and uncompromising, qualities that could inspire soldiers but also alienate superiors. By the late 1930s, the rumblings of another global conflict were growing louder. For Patton, it was the call he had been waiting for. The battlefield would soon return, and with it, his chance to prove that his vision for armored warfare was not just theory, but the key to victory. When the United States entered World War II, Patton was finally where he belonged, at the center of a global conflict. His first major command came in 1942, leading the Western Task Force during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. In a campaign marked by complex coordination between land, sea, and air forces, Patton captured Casablanca and proved he could command large-scale operations with precision and speed. But his real test came in early 1943, after the U.S. II Corps suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of German forces at Kasserine Pass. Morale was shattered, discipline had crumbled, and confidence in American troops was at a low point. Eisenhower turned to Patton to take command and turn things around. He imposed immediate iron discipline. Uniforms had to be worn correctly, salutes snapped sharply, and orders executed without hesitation. Many soldiers resented the changes at first, but in the field, Patton's methods worked. At El Guitar, his revitalized corps won a decisive victory, proving American forces could stand toe-to-toe with the best of the German army. From North Africa, Patton moved on to command the 7th U.S. Army in the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. His orders were to protect the flank of British General Bernard Montgomery, but Patton saw an opportunity to do more. Driving his forces at breakneck speed, he captured Palermo and then won the unofficial race to Messina, arriving ahead of Montgomery's forces. It was a bold move that boosted his reputation among the troops and irritated his British counterpart. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed his career. In August 1943, during hospital visits in Sicily, Patton physically slapped and verbally berated 2 soldiers suffering from what we now recognize as combat stress. Calling them cowards, he ordered them back to the front. News of the incidents sparked outrage in the press and at home. Eisenhower issued a stern reprimand and temporarily removed Patton from combat command. It could have been the end of his career, but while Patton was sidelined, the Germans still considered him the Allies' most dangerous general, a perception Eisenhower would soon use as a weapon in one of the most elaborate deceptions of the war. After the slapping incidents, Patton's reputation took a beating in the press. But in the eyes of the German High Command, he was still the Allies' most feared general. They believed he was the only Allied commander capable of leading a decisive invasion of Europe. Eisenhower saw an opportunity and put Patton at the center of Operation Fortitude, one of the most ambitious deception campaigns in military history. Instead of commanding real combat troops, Patton was given the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. On paper, it was a massive invasion force poised to strike at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. In reality, it was a carefully constructed illusion. Inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, dummy aircraft, and fabricated radio traffic designed to sell the lie. For weeks before the Normandy landings, Patton played his role to perfection, making public appearances and issuing orders that reinforced the idea he would lead the main assault. The ruse worked. Even after the D-Day landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, German commanders kept large forces stationed near Calais, convinced Patton's real invasion was still to come. It was a strange assignment for a man who lived for direct combat, and Patton chafed at being kept out of the fight. But the deception gave the Allies a critical edge in Normandy, helping ensure the success of the landings.